Welcome to Tech Capture. So in this video, we are going to start a very important AWS service, that is AWS Lambda. So this AWS Lambda is one of the most famous AWS service and it is a very widely used. So whoever the customers are using the AWS, definitely they are going to use AWS Lambda because of its wide range of flexibility and the use cases. Okay, so in this video we are going to see a lot of things about Lambda. So what we are going to see in this video, so first we'll see what is Lambda function in AWS, then we'll see AWS Lambda fundamentals and the commonly used terminologies about Lambda. Then we'll see some limitations about AWS Lambda, because this Lambda service, even though it is commonly used, it is not best suited for all the use cases. So we'll see what are the limitations with AWS Lambda, and then we'll create our first Lambda function without any trigger, and then we'll see one Lambda function with a trigger. Okay, so all these things we are going to cover in this video. So I would just request, if you want to learn Lambda end to end and you want to have a good understanding about the AWS Lambda function, then just stay tuned till the end and we'll learn Lambda together. Okay, so now I'll just see what is a Lambda function in AWS. So now let's see what is AWS Lambda function. So AWS Lambda is a serverless computing service offered by AWS. It lets you run your code without having to manage servers. You write your code, upload it to AWS, and it will automatically take care of everything required to run your code. Now let me explain you in simple language. So in our previous videos we have seen how we can start our EC2 instance and deploy kind of applications on EC2 instance, or how we can use EC2 compute power on EC2 instances, and we can use the auto scaling group to manage our EC2 instances. So if our application is growing, then it will auto scale our EC2 instances, but that we have to configure. A lot of things we have to take care there. We have to take care of launch template, we have to take care of the scaling policies, and if we are using only a standalone EC2 instance, there also we have to take care of OS, AMI, servers, then the persistent is how much storage it is having, we have to keep monitor. So a lot of things we have to take care whenever we are working on the servers. But Lambda provides you the serverless functionality, so you don't need to manage anything kind of the servers, or you don't need to manage storage. All things will be managed by Lambda at the backend. You just bring your code and you run your code and AWS Lambda, and it will just take care at the backend about the servers and underlying infrastructure. Okay, so it is having a lot of good features. So first is no server management, so you no need to provision, maintain, manage any kind of servers. AWS will handle infrastructure and its scaling and reliability. Okay, so you will only pay for your used infrastructure or used time. Okay, now let's say example, if you are running EC2 instances and you are running some jobs on that EC2 instances, but your jobs is executing only once or twice in a day, but you are keeping your EC2 instance running for whole day, because you don't know when your job will execute. Whenever there is a file coming, whenever there is an event coming, whenever that event is happening, and you are just executing your job on your EC2 instances, then you are paying additional cost for a remaining 22 hours or 20 hours. Okay, so this is a unnecessarily cost. But here using AWS Lambda, you will only pay for the time you are using that compute capacity and no additional cost. So no usage means no cost. If you are not using Lambda, then you no need to pay. If your Lambda function is running for 2 minutes, then you have to pay only for that 2 minutes. And even though their free tier is also very big, so it is almost, you will use this service with a very low cost. Okay, so that's why it's a very familiar service, and it is scalable by default. So if the load on your Lambda is increasing, it will just increase your or scale your infrastructure at the back end. It is event driven. So let's say suppose there are a requirement. Okay, so whenever you are getting a file into S3 bucket, then you have to process that file, you have to perform some operation on that file, you have to load that data from that file. So a lot of things you have to do whenever there is a file. But if we don't have any kind of functionality to schedule or do anything, then we have to use the events. So here the Lambda is event based, so you can use number of events to trigger your Lambda function. So one famous example, whenever you are getting file into your S3 bucket, it will trigger your Lambda function. So it is like S3 event. You can have API gateway, you will have DynamoDB, a lot of other events or external sources you are also having to trigger your Lambda function, and you don't need to manually go and execute your Lambda function. Then it is a multi-language support. So your Lambda function supports Python, Node.js, Java, Go, Ruby, and other languages. So whatever language you are compatible, you can just write your application code into that language or your function into that language, and you will just execute your code on AWS Lambda. So this is a simple introduction of AWS Lambda service. Now quickly I'll just cover commonly used terminologies in the Lambda, or I would say the fundamentals of AWS Lambda. Okay, so first is a function, then trigger, event, execution environment, deployment package, runtime, layer, concurrency, qualifier, destination. Okay, so these are commonly used term, and I want you to get at least the understanding of this term before starting creating your Lambda function. I'll quickly go to each of these terminology. So function, it is a piece of your code. So whatever you want to execute in Lambda function, that is your function. Or you can see the function in AWS Lambda is a core code that perform a task when triggered. Second is trigger. Trigger is an event that cause your Lambda function to run. So let's say example, I am uploading an S3 file to your bucket and it will trigger your Lambda function. So that is your trigger. Uploading file to S3 bucket is your trigger. Then third is the event. So event is basically the data we are passing to your Lambda function, so it can use that and execute the code. So suppose I am uploading file to S3 bucket using the S3 trigger, and when I upload the file, all the details related to this bucket, this S3 bucket, the file we uploaded, timing, all these metadata will be passed under the event, and it will process that event data. Okay, so you can see the event might be content details about the file uploaded to S3 or anything. Okay, so then next is execution environment. So as I said, even though Lambda we don't need to configure any kind of servers, but we have option to allocate kind of CPU and capacities based on our requirement. Okay, so when you run Lambda, AWS provide a server with certain CPU memory and runtime libraries to code execute your functions code. That is your execution environment where your Lambda execution actually happens. Deployment package is nothing but your code, bundled code. So if you are using a Python code and dependencies, then you have to bundle your code together and then you will upload it to the Lambda. So that is your deployment package. Then a runtime, so which language you are using. So if you are using the Python, if you are using the Node.js, so that is your runtime you have to select while creating your Lambda function. Okay, then the next is layer. So layer is wait package and share libraries. So I would give an example. So suppose there is a request package in Python, so this request package can be used in multiple Lambda functions. Okay, and if you are running 10 Lambda function, and while executing each Lambda function you are manually, or you are uploading your dependencies along with each function, then it will just increase the size of your code. Instead you can create one layer with a request module dependencies, and you can just attach that layer to all 10 Lambda function, then it will just reduce the size of your code. So that's how we can use a layers. Layers is nothing but it's allow you to reuse your code, and it is just kind of zip file with your package libraries. Okay, then the concurrency is number of Lambda functions are running at the same times. If you have multiple event triggers for your code or for your function, it will automatically scale up to handle the load. Okay, if functions trigger 10 times at once, AWS will run 10 separate concurrent instances of your function, so you can define this concurrency as well. Then last we have qualifier. Qualifier is a way to specify a specific version of your Lambda function. It helps to manage the different versions. So suppose you are updating your Lambda code, so it keep updating your versions. Okay, just like your any application versions you are having the versioning. So if you have multiple versions of Lambda function, you can specify which one to use using this qualifier. Okay, then destination. So a destination is where your AWS Lambda sends result of a function execution. So this also we'll see the destination will have option SNS topic, SQS, S3 bucket, and different other destination. These are the common terminologies in AWS Lambda. Now this was all about the conceptual things about AWS Lambda. Now it's time for a practical demo. So what I will do, I'll go to my AWS Cloud Console and I'll start creating our first Lambda function. So I am on my AWS Cloud Console home now. So here you can directly go to Lambda from here, or you can search Lambda in your search bar and then you can go to Lambda screen. So if you haven't created any Lambda function in your region, it will show you a 0 here, or it will navigate you to the begin screen. So this is my begin screen. It automatically navigated, and here it will just give some basic overview that you can run your code without thinking about the server, because Lambda is a serverless, and you can just start creating a function. So let's go and create function. So there are three options here. Either you can author from scratch, you can use a blueprint, or you can use a container image. So this is just for having some kind of additional template we will use here, but instead we want to know more about Lambda from the basics, so I'll go with the author from scratch, so we'll not miss any kind of learning while creating the Lambda function. So here I'll just give the name as my first Lambda, so that a dummy name or a simple name I'm giving here. And runtime, we already seen runtime is the language in which you are going to write your function code, so I will use Python 3.8 here. Okay, so one more important thing here is the permissions. Okay, so I will go and create new role with a basic Lambda permission, so it will create execution role with this name. Okay, so I'll go and check the additional configuration. So this is, we want to keep default, so I'll go and simply create a function. Now you might think there is no option to write code here, but yeah, it will create your function with default code, and then we can update our code and then deploy our Lambda function. So on the next screen you will see our code, which is a default code for now, but you will have option to update your code and deploy your Lambda function. So now you can see you are onto the screen now. Currently there is no trigger, no destination, no layers, only your Lambda function, that is the my first Lambda, and your code will load here. So currently this is a new editor. You can switch back to old editor. I'll show the difference as well, and there are some difficulties people are having while using the new editor. So this is our new Lambda function which we created just now, and this is our default code which will just return the message hello from Lambda. Okay, and here is option to deploy. So in old screen there were option at the top, test and deploy. So if I go back to old editor, okay, so it is just ask, okay, why you want to go to old editor, so you can give the feedback if you are facing any difficulty is in new editor. And here you will have option to test, and once you modify your code it will show you option to deploy. So suppose if I modify something here, then it will ask you to deploy because your changes are not deployed. We'll just go to the new console. Okay, I'll go back to new editor, and here I will simply deploy my code. So instead of hello from Lambda, I'll just update this as a hello from first Lambda. Okay, so this will be your message which will be get returned as a output. Now I'll just deploy this. Okay, I'll click on deploy, and at the bottom it will show the deployment status, which I feel it's not good for new console or new editor. Okay, so if I click on deploy, so it is showing updating, successfully updated a function, and at the bottom also it will show a deployment successful. So this message should be somewhere above, so you will see the deployment is in progress. Okay, now how we can run this? So first we can test it. Okay, so first we'll test it. So how we'll test it? So for testing it, you have to create a test case. Okay, so this is bit different things here. So I'll just give the test Lambda. Okay, and what it will do, it will just pass event. So we already seen event is the data which will be passed to your Lambda function. Okay, so this is your event, so it is just passing the value key1, value 2, key 2, value 2. So instead what I will do, I'll just write name and I will write Vishal. I'll just write here as a skill, and I'll write here AWS. So I'll pass only two. I'll remove this comma. So I'll pass this only as my event data, and here I'll just print. So whatever event we are getting, so we'll print that. So I'll just print event. Okay, so it will print this one and return this message. So now I'll just save my test case as well, and also I'll just drag it here, and I also made changes here, so I have to deploy my code again. I'll just deploy it. You can see deployment successful. Now I can test my lambda function. Okay, so let me close this. Okay, and now I'll test my lambda function using the test lambda case. So here you will see the output, test event name, test lambda status code successful, and the print will be in your log. So what it is printing, name is Vishal, skill AWS, because this is complete event we print. Now suppose I want to print only a name, so I'll update my lambda function and we'll just give. So name, just check it is in capital or small. Name, okay. I'll just give name. Okay, I'll just deploy my function again. I'll close the output, hide the screen, and I'll test again. So now you can see it's only printing the name because we are getting only name from this, and here you are getting hello from my first lambda. So now hope you understood how we can create our first lambda function. Okay, so that's it for this video, and we'll create a new lambda function with trigger in our new video. So thank you for watching this video, and we'll see you again in the next video.